additives. Are they good or are they bad, or could they just be plain old ugly? Hi, I'm Lake, the motor oil geek, and when you walk in an auto parts store, there's a literal wall full of additives making all kinds of claims. Well, is it just snake oil? Or do some of these products actually do what they say they do? Well, you know this channel, we're all about the science instead of the speculation. So let's get some different additives, let's put them to the test, and show you some real-world results. So we purchased 9 different motor oil additives, and we got some PAO base oil, so we can add the additives to the base oil and see what did they add. So here's the thing you need to know about additives, either a fuel additive or a motor oil additive. Unlike a motor oil that actually has to meet an API or OEM specification, additives don't. So just know that just because it's in a bottle on the shelf, that doesn't mean it has to meet any specs. Okay, so after reading the instructions on all 9 additives to get the treat rate, they're all working out right around 1.5 ounces per quart of oil. So we'll blend that much into the PAO base oil and send it off to the lab for analysis. Separation right there, look at that. All right, we'll mix it up now. Oh, you gotta see this. Yeah, thank goodness you have an engine to mix this stuff up. Now you may be saying, you're doing it wrong. You're adding too much additive, and that's gonna throw off the results. Well, we're measuring in parts per million, so that is concentration. We can adjust the lab results to hit the correct concentration because the base oil isn't adding anything to it, it's just would be diluting it down. But to prove that, let's go ahead and blend up a couple of correct samples just for verification. This is the greatest cleaner ever invented. SD20 from Spartan Chemical. If you've never used this stuff and you're a car person, you need to have some of this stuff in your life. I'm just telling you right now, it's amazing. Look at that stuff. This is like weird science. One of the funny things about additives is that there will be someone that says, you know, I used, brand X additive and I picked up 5 miles to the gallon. And another person will say, well, I used brand X additive and I lost 5 main bearings. Well, which one's lying? Well, neither one of them are. The reality is that motor oils are already a complex mixture. There can be 14 different chemicals in one motor oil. And when you add another chemical, or 3 or 4, or you don't know how many, to that mix, sometimes it could go good, sometimes it could go bad. It's basically chemical Russian roulette with your engine whenever you put an additive into your oil. Base oil, Lucas Oil Stabilizer. Let's see what happens here. When we mix it. Definitely the thickest. Ooh, it's getting really foamy. Quite a bit less foamy than the Lucas for certain, but much lighter in viscosity than the oil stabilizer. The FR3 nanotechnology. Nano, that just means it's small. Yep, I won't comment anymore. All right, we have our clean, dried frother to mix it up. Now this one is completely clear. So let's see how this one does. Let's mix it up. Last 3 samples plus our bonus surprise samples. Let's go ahead and get moving on. 100 milliliter more of our Exxon Mobil SpectraSyn Max 3.5. They told me they use this stuff in the Red Bull Formula One cars. I have no reason to doubt them. The stuff is pretty cool, and maybe that Max means Max Verstappen. I don't know. Thing about additives. And yes, I chose this one on purpose. Because think back about all of the sponsorships. Richard Petty, the Indy 500, all the different things that STP did over the years. Can you think of many motor oils that have sponsored as much stuff as that? No, it's because when you sell additives, you make more money. It's just that simple. This is a 15-ounce bottle that sells for as much as a full quart of oil. And there are some additives that sell for $15 for only 12 ounces. Well, that's 3 times the amount of money compared to even a premium motor oil. So the next time you see an additive being marketed, just know that there's a heavy financial incentive to say additives are better than motor oils by themselves. And of course, my thought is this: if you have to put an additive in your oil, it means you have the wrong oil. See, basically two distinct layers with this one right here. Let's see how it mixes. I'll keep it right up here so we can see it as it happens. A little bit hazy on that first takeoff there. Definitely nowhere near as foamy as the Seafoam was. Oil Extreme. We actually tested this stuff at Joe Gibbs Racing years ago, and it didn't work too good for us. Oil Extreme PAO 3.5 Max. So we have 2 bags full of samples right now. We got what, 5 in each bag, so that's 10. Plus we have 2 more coming, so hang on. So after packing up all the samples and sending them off to the lab, I realized we had forgotten 2 of the most iconic brands of additives ever: STP and Marvel Mystery Oil. So let's go ahead and get these samples blended up and send them off to the lab so we can show you the results. Let's go. All right, let's mix it up. There we go, we're getting it in the mix a little bit now. There we go. Just so you know, the irony of this video is not lost on me. My dad, he was sponsored by an additive company. Wins was the primary sponsor when he won in NASCAR. But no OEM on the planet actually recommends using an oil additive in your oil. So just remember that fact. Both the Marvel Mystery Oil and Lucas Oil Stabilizer can treat up to 20% of the total oil, which means if you keep the same oil level, you're actually diluting the additive package in the oil. I wonder what impact that would have on the oxidation performance of the oil. So I asked our buddies at HPL if they would run oxidation tests for us in the lab. There's a lab test called Rotating Pressure Vessel Oxidation Test, RPVOT. It's a way of determining oxidation life of the oil. So we're gonna run regular old Mobil 1 520 to determine our baseline. Then we're gonna take our 20% diluted sample of Mobil 1 with the Lucas Oil Stabilizer and another one with Marvel Mystery Oil. We'll check all 3 samples and see what the oxidation life is for all 3. So let's start off with the good. The only good additives are actually fuel additives. The brands here, that's not what's important. What's really important is they all contain polyetheramine, which is a detergent additive that can clean injectors and combustion chamber deposits. That's the key, because dirty fuel injectors are a problem. Now this is showing some diesel injectors right here, and this is a problem both gasoline and diesels. So when you have very poor atomization of the fuel, you tend to have more fuel dilution. And when fuel dilution goes up, just like you can see here with these results, wear goes way up. Doing used oil analysis, that's the number one thing I see, is that typically when we have high levels of fuel dilution, you have high levels of wear. So you want to try to combat those dirty injectors by using a fuel detergent additive in order to keep them clean, to keep fuel dilution down, so your wear metals are down. Here's a great example of injector deposits without detergent and with detergent. Now again, this is a diesel, so thanks to the guys from CAT for sharing this. Here's a diesel at 705 hours, and you can see those deposits on the injectors that are causing poor atomization of the fuel. And then you can see even at almost 100 hours later, but using a fuel detergent additive, how much cleaner the injectors are. So they say cleanliness is next to godliness. That's especially true when it comes to injectors for fuel dilution. So the good additives are fuel detergent additives to keep your injectors clean. And again, here's proof of that. Without a fuel detergent additive, the fuel dilution had got up over 2.5% on this engine. And in one treatment with a polyethyramine-based fuel detergent additive, it cleaned it up, and the next sample, fuel dilution was right back down to normal. So fuel detergent additives, really important to use. Okay, now let's get to the bad, and let's see what these additives did to the oil. But first, we gotta remember, so what's motor oil actually made of? Well, it's two things, base oil and additives. So the base oils only come from a handful of companies, and the additives only come from a handful of companies. So most companies are just buying base oil and buying an additive package and blending them together. Now the thing is, when you add an additive to that oil, you don't know what it's going to do. It might work with it and make the oil better, or it might work against it and make the oil worse. We have some examples of that, so stay tuned. So you might be wondering, how can you make it worse? So in our previous video, when we talked about ZDP, zinc, it's a polar additive. It tries to go to the metallic surfaces in the engine to create films, to protect those surfaces. But you can have too much zinc. At very low levels of zinc, wear is very high because there's adhesive wear. But as you add more zinc, it can become corrosive. So there is such a thing as too much of even a good thing. So you have to keep that in mind when we're talking about additives and the potential downfalls of using an additive. It's also important to remember that the different additive packages sometimes work against each other. And here's some real world proof of when two different additive packages are actually fighting each other, which is increasing wear. So the results in the right-hand side of the report are the first drain sample from the first oil change going from the factory oil to the driven DI-20. Now, both oils are fine oils, but what you see, the wear metals here, we have 10 parts per million iron, 12 parts per million copper. But I can tell you that by looking at the additive package in that first sample of the DI-20 coming after that first oil change, I can tell you there was residual oil still in the engine from that previous oil change that was reacting and competing with the additive package in the DI-20. How do I know that? Well, I happen to have formulated DI-20, so I know there's no magnesium in DI-20. But we clearly see 147 parts per million of magnesium in this drain sample. I can also see the phosphorus levels are a little bit lower than what they should be for DI-20. Well, that's the first indication that there was some carryover effect from that previous oil. Now look at the second sample, the ones in the far left-hand column, and you can see the iron went from 10 parts per million down to 4. Copper went from 12 down to 1. Why did that happen? It's because now after that second drain and fill, all the residual oil from the factory oil had been flushed through, Gone was the original oil. Now the Di-20 has been able to establish itself, and you can see what's happened. Magnesium levels are down closer to normal. Phosphorus levels are back up higher, closer to normal. So once the Di-20 has been established and there's no more competition between the two different additive packages, the results get better. Again, this is an example of why using an additive can be problematic because of that additive competition. You can see the results right here for yourself before we even start talking about what's in the bottle. All right, so with that established, let's get on to the results. Okay, so far left-hand column, that's our PAO 3.5. That's just base oil, no additives. So we added in the liquid moly MOS2 that has molybdenum, and guess what? As we can see, adding the liquid moly MOS2 just has added moly to the oil. Now, in the next column is the liquid moly Ceratec. Now, it's bringing in some calcium, some phosphorus, some zinc, some molybdenum, some boron. It's bringing in a little bit of everything, and it's actually increased the base slightly. So those two products aren't having a dramatic effect on either the acid number, the base number, or viscosity. The next one is the Lucas Oil Stabilizer. It's just thickener. There's no additive in it. There's no zinc, there's no moly, but it's not really adding any additives, so it could be diluting the additive package. Stay tuned, we're going to cover that in a minute. So our next group of additives is the Lucas TB Zinc additive, and we can see that it adds a lot of zinc. 2,700 parts per million phosphorus, 2,037 parts per million zinc. Fortunately, it did bring in 643 parts per million calcium, so that the effect isn't acidic, because zinc by itself would have actually caused the oil to become acidic. That's how it can become corrosive. As we mentioned earlier, by adding the calcium, the detergent, it's neutralized it, so it hasn't had a giant impact on the acid number or the base number of the oil by itself. Next, we move to Prolong, which is a chlorinated paraffin. This is a very problematic product because chlorinated paraffins, well, they don't have the best environmental impact, and they can also become quite corrosive in certain environments. Chlorinated paraffins are typically used as metalworking additives. They will perform amazing in any kind of bearing tester, any kind of load testing device. They will shine because they work extremely well at low temperature. But that chlorine that makes it work so good in the load testing devices can become hydrochloric acid if the chemical environment becomes just right, which is why it's not widely used as a motor oil additive. So again, problematic. You put this stuff in there, you are definitely taking a risk. So our next one is the Hot Shot Secret FR3 Nano Additive. And as we saw in our previous video about nano additives, they can reduce friction, but in that case, it increased wear. So another example of sometimes what you get isn't what you expect when you put an additive in your oil. Now we did notice that it did increase the oxidation number, which means it has a ester that as the carrier oil. So, but that can be a problem because sometimes if you mix esters, they can do bad things. Again, stay tuned. You may see more of this in a minute. Okay, so far we've shown results of adding the additive to just a pure base oil. What happens when you add the additive to a fully formulated oil? So in this case, we took the Lucas Oil Stabilizer and the Marvel Mystery Oil and added it to just regular old Mobil 1. And you can see the results are quite clear. We mentioned it earlier, the Lucas Oil Stabilizer is a thickener and it doesn't contain any additives. So what happens? Viscosity goes up, additive levels go down. Very clear. We went from 1,230 parts per million calcium. It dropped down to 443. Our phosphorus and our ZDP went from 681 down to 430. Now that phosphorus level is below the API minimum of 600 for this type of oil. So that's a problem. It's now taking the oil out of the spec range on both viscosity to the high side and additive package to the low side. I can't see anything good coming from that. Then on the Marvel Mystery Oil, it actually lowered the viscosity, so now it's out of viscosity grade range to the low side, and it's had some impact on the zinc and the phosphorus levels. Although it's still within the API spec range, it's definitely brought that detergent level down, changed that chemistry. So let's see what happens when we run an oxidation test, because that's the key. As we dilute the additive package, the main thing we're concerned about is it going to shorten the life of the oil, right? This is an additive. It's supposed to be boosting the oil. But we clearly see here in both cases, it's actually diluting the oil, which could reduce the oil's working life. When the oil's life is shortened, deposits will increase. Here are the results from the RPVOT oxidation test, where we're taking the oil, we're putting it in a vessel, we're putting in oxygen, and we're heating up and rotating it, agitating it, and we're watching to see when does the pressure change. Because when the pressure change occurs, that's what indicates the oil has oxidized. When you see that spike go up, that means the oil is dead. So we can see here is that the blue peak to the furthest to the right, that's the Mobil 1. That's our baseline. But as we added the Lucas Oil Stabilizer and diluted the additive package, it moved the peak to the left. It shortened the life of the oil. And the same thing occurred with the Marvel Mystery Oil. It diluted the additive package and shortened the life of the oil, evidenced by that shift in the peak to the left. Less time means shorter oil life, which could mean more deposits in your engine. Again, this channel is about science, not speculation. These results, they're pretty much slam dunk conclusive proof. Putting the additive in your oil compromises the life of your oil. And these are just the bad ones. Now let's go look at the ugly ones. The Rizlone ZDDP. So unlike the Lucas additive that had that really good detergent package to balance the base so it didn't become acidic, the Rizlone, it didn't even add as much ZDP, but it became way more acidic. So that's not good. This stuff could cause damage, could cause bearing wear, corrosion damage in the engine because it's raising the acid number. Again, shortening the life of your oil, changing the chemical balance. And then this last one, the Oil Extreme, if you have a direct injection engine, never ever use this product. It could cause low speed pre-ignition in your engine and destroy your engine if you use this additive, because it has such a high level of calcium and sodium. 4,037 parts per million calcium, 329 parts per million sodium. Either one of those by themselves is enough to cause low speed pre-ignition in a turbocharged direct injection engine. And it has both of them in there. I hope these results so far are convincing enough that you know that, okay, I really shouldn't be putting these kind of additives in my oil. The chances of something going wrong are probably greater than something going well for me. But if that's not enough to convince you, let's look at some real world results when people actually put these products in real engines and we see the used oil results. So in this first one, we have the Liquimoly Ceratec plus Liquimoly engine flush. All right, you don't need to use an engine flush. We're going to cover that in a future video, so I'm not going to get into that right now, but I'm not a fan of any additives, including flushes. And what you see here is a ton of iron in the oil. This oil only has 2,500 miles on it, and it has over 42 parts per million iron. And this is from a Porsche engine that doesn't have an iron bore. Those iron numbers should be in the teens, not in the 40s. So here's a great example of what happens when you put in additives to the oil and it does the opposite of what you want it to do. It's increasing wear. So here's our next one. AMSOIL Signature Series plus the Hot Shot Secret FR3 nanotechnology. We mentioned it earlier about how that Hot Shot Secrets had an ester as the carrier oil. Well, when you blend esters, they can sometimes work against each other. The AMSOIL Signature Series is a PAO ester blended product. We see really good results with it, but in this case, we have a ton of copper wear going on, and the oxidation level is actually increased more so than you would normally see, and the viscosity is down. Well, that's because of the FR3. It's thinned it down. The oxidation part is changed because of those competing esters, which has now compromised the wear and caused the softness, the yellow metal, the copper wear to increase. So again, not great. A Bronco like this, those copper levels should be in the teens, not the 30s. Yet another example of, I'm gonna make my good oil better, but it didn't work out that way. And this one might be the worst one yet. So we have regular old Castrol GTX plus the Rizlone ZDDP, which we saw earlier was increasing the acid number. And this guy, 1,500 miles. Well, the viscosity is down and the wear is through the roof. I mean, the iron is higher, lead and tin, manganese. This is bad. I hate this. This is why I hate oil marketing. And the one I hate the most are the additive people. It's the worst. I see this stuff all the time. This isn't just cherry picking over 10 years. This is stuff I've seen in the last 3 or 4 months. It's bad. Don't use an additive. It's dangerous. And here's our final example of don't be the backyard chemist. This is a blend of Royal Purple, Castrol, and Lucas. So they mixed a whole bunch of different things together. I think the Lucas was actually the Lucas oil stabilizer, which is why the viscosity is up. But then the additive package is down and there's all kinds of weird things happening. And back to lead. We have unleaded fuel, but we have a increased level of lead in the oil showing there's bearing wear occurring. So while I'm sure he thought this blend was going to protect his Corvette engine, it's actually causing increased wear in his Corvette engine. Again, the motto of this channel is science, not speculation. I hope these results clearly show it's not a good idea to put an additive in your oil.